We're back with the Wheel of Time reviews, going to be talking about A Crown of Swords in this one. This will be spoiler filled. My first impressions after finishing this book is that I didn't really get a sense of a slog happening at all. I really liked this book. It was definitely slower paced and less action packed than previous entries in the series, but that didn't bother me. I can get how the whole slog came to be though. If books 7 to 10 are slower paced, and on top of that people had to wait 2 years per book instead of one, then yeah, I get it feeling like a slog. I feel like whether or not there's a slog now comes down to personal preference, seeing as all the books have been released. Going off of what I've read in book 7 and what I've seen been said about book 7 to 10, it feels like book 10 is the only real slog of a book, with potentially 8 as well, depending on the person. Beyond that, it seems to just come down to whether or not you mind the shift in the structure of the story. By this point, there's so many characters and plot lines introduced that Jordan, I guess, just decided to have arcs progress through the slog rather than be self-contained like in previous books. So you get this scenario where things aren't properly concluded by the end of the book and are instead progressed throughout the slog. And not always from book to book, there are gaps. Like I know, for example, Matt just isn't in book 8 at all. This structure change is fine with me, honestly. Make what we get in each book enjoyable, and I'll be happy to continue. I'm actually more excited to continue the series after A Crown of Swords than any of the previous books. So getting into A Crown of Swords itself, like I said at the beginning, I really like this book. It's probably ranked 4th or 5th for me. Out of the first 7 books, I liked it way more than The Fires of Heaven, and I'd probably put it above The Dragon Reborn as well. Not sure if I'd put any of the other books below it. I'd need to think about it a bit more. It was more character focused than previous books. Again, this didn't bother me. I thought Rand's and Matt's arcs especially were great. So let's get into it. The prologue in this book was good, though it was not one of my favorites. We meet up with Elaida, Alviarin, Savannah, Gawain, Pedro Niall, and Valda. I think that's everyone. I'm not going to summarize these like I usually do because I'm lazy, but I will mention the important stuff. When we get to Elaida's POV, she's having her palace built at the White Tower, and Alviarin brings her a bunch of reports. The main takeaway from this POV is that Elaida has sent Tovann to the Black Tower to take care of the Ashaman, and she also has this foretelling. The White Tower will be whole again, except for remnants cast out and scorned, whole and stronger than ever. Randall Tor will face the ambulance seat and know her anger. The Black Tower will be rent in blood and fire, and sisters will walk its ground. I think the first half of this is easy enough to analyse. Egwene and co will take back the White Tower, and it'll end up being Rand versus Egwene at some point. Not sure what'll actually start off that conflict. I assume it's going to be over Rand making those 9 Aes Sedai sword to him. The second half of this has me a bit confused though. I'm not sure I have the right answer about what the second half means, but I have 2 possibilities. The first is that it is just referencing Tovan's group doing some damage before they get wiped out. The second is that this is Cadsuane teaching the Ashaman manners, like what she mentioned while Rand was in his bedridden state. So she'll just get like this tighter grip on Rand gradually, and then boom, she is doing this power move where she's disciplining Rand and all the Ashaman, where she just wrecks the Black Tower. I guess I could go for a third option here and say that the Black Tower being rented in Blood and Fire is just referencing the inner conflict among the Ashaman that is pretty much guaranteed to happen at some point. The bits about the Black Tower being rented in Blood and Fire and the sisters walking its ground might not even be totally connected, like the sisters could just be the ones sworn to Rand. The next important part from the prologue is Pedro Niall's POV. Pedro Niall, after having a game of stones with Morghese, is killed by Omerna, who is then killed by Valda. Or I think Omerna stabs him and then Valda does the finishing blow. R.I.P. to my guy Pedro Niall. I really started to like him during the last book. I thought he had some of the best political intrigue in the series. Perrin's up first in this book. Don't really have much to say for Perrin. I'm starting to think Robert Jordan just doesn't like Perrin. This is another book where he's not really in it that much. We pick back up at Demise Wells and we see the aftermath of the battle, and Perrin's worried over how the Aes Sedai are being treated and how the alliances between nations are under a lot of tension. There's a really bad mood in the camp and he wants to talk to Rand about it. There's some moments I really liked from Perrin's early chapters, like how he snapped at the Aes Sedai trying to cover for Rand, and how Rand and Perrin have their first standoff where Perrin is saying to Rand where he won't let anything bad happen to the Aes Sedai, and Rand is like, well, what are you going to do about it? I really liked that. I thought that was great. You can tell Matt, Rand, and Perrin are still really good friends, but the Dragon Reborn aspect just isn't negligible anymore. And you even have moments where Even Perrin is seeing Rand as the Dragon Reborn first and Rand al'Thor second, which is a pretty sad but ultimately unavoidable development, and it makes you think again on this theme of loneliness starting to come up with Rand from this perspective too. I've been thinking since book 2 that Rand and Perrin will end up against each other at some point. Maybe this is foreshadowing that later conflict. Besides that, Perrin is just mainly dealing with Fael relationship nonsense for his arc. I'm really tired of the Berlain and Fael stuff. I wouldn't mind, but literally last book we got a vision showing that Berlain is going to end up with Galad. So now that I know Berlain's endgame, I just could not care less about this triangle that they got going on. We also got the second Rand and Perrin standoff where Rand just tosses Perrin around with the one power. This one was pretty clearly a fake meant to throw off people's eyes and ears. I'd say it was only as bad as it was because Perrin chose to use the Aes Sedai as the topic for the argument. So Perrin's group has been sent off to Ghealdan to deal with Masema. I'm pretty excited for where this arc goes in later books. I hope this makes Perrin a more prevalent POV from now on. I just hope it doesn't have too much of this Fael and Berlain stuff. It should be an interesting arc though, because we know Samael sent some Shaido to Ghealdan, and we know that the White Cloaks are probably going to be there as well, so them in combination with the Prophet should make for a good arc. Before moving on, I got some theory stuff. In one of Perrin's first chapters, he heard the word that sang and thought he should know what it meant. I think this is his past reincarnation starting to come through. Don't forget that during the Dragon Reborn, Perrin looked in the mirror and saw his past self, just like Rand has done at some point. In part 2 of my Lord of Chaos review, I talked about how I thought Perrin is the soul of the shadow mentioned in Corian and Nadil's notes, aka the seed of the shadow going off of yin and yang. And then again in one of his earlier chapters at the Mice Wells, he said this: there would be battles in Ilian, images flash in his head, men all around him, and the axe in his hand spinning, hewing his way through. Always more men, however many he cut down, in endless ranks, and in his heart a seed growing. Just gonna put that out there, I could be way off, but the seed growing bit is interesting. Talking about Rand next, early on in Perrin's POVs, we see the return to Cairhien, where Rand proceeds to completely shit all over Colavir, and he has this absolutely raw moment where he takes the sun crown off her head and starts breaking it and fixing it again before saying, whatever can be done can be undone. One of the most badass lines in the series so far, in my opinion. I fucking love that. And then he strips Colavir of everything that makes her a noble, which later results in her hanging herself. I really wish Rand would get over this not killing women bullshit. It is so annoying, and it's just really stupid and naive, especially after this issue, the same issue, has gotten Moiraine killed. He fucking lopped the chick's head off during the Dragon Reborn. I don't get why he's so cripplingly against it now. Rand in this annoyed me a lot, but I still thought his arc was great. Like, some of his decisions were stupid, and he's starting to get really arrogant to the point where he's saying he can do anything because he's the Dragon Reborn. But it's important to remember that everything Rand does in A Crown of Swords is coming off the back of him being tortured on the way to the Mice Wells. To me, Rand's arrogance in this is him trying to convince himself of his might rather than those around him. He keeps saying he's the Dragon Reborn and ta'veren. I think this is all self-assurance, especially when you see how he has clearly been traumatized during this book. In his first POV chapter, he's visiting Davram Bashir in Caemlyn to plan the attack on Ilian, and you can see clearly how uncomfortable he is when he's being led to the meeting location as a fake prisoner. He's unable to handle being tied up or being in darkness. Then again, when he's visiting the Sea Folk, you see how he has developed this claustrophobia after being trapped in the box, and he has to leave the bargaining. This trauma explains why he made some of his more seemingly rash decisions too, like when he decided to go deal with the rebels straight after the Sea Folk. While you could look at this at him trying to reassure himself of his strength as the Dragon Reborn and ta'veren, it's also him avoiding going back to the Sea Folk cabin. So while you're reading it, you think it's just Rand trying to test out his ta'veren pull, but in reality, it is that, but also subconsciously, he's just crumbled under the trauma. He doesn't want to go back to that environment, so now he needs to do this for his own stability and self-assurance. If he goes to deal with the rebels, he doesn't have to go back to the Sea Folk cabin again. I think you can also use this trauma to explain how poorly he handled meeting Cat Swain for the first time as well. But I don't think the trauma is responsible for all of Rand's actions in this book, though. I think he is genuinely starting to go a bit mad. He clearly has some screws loose now, like when he was repeatedly saying aloud to himself that he's a Dragon Reborn, when he's thinking about everybody moving against him, even though he's the one prophesied to save everybody. After Rand and Min travel to the area where the rebels are camped, we get the Into the Woods and the Blaze chapters, which I thought were both amazing. I really loved seeing Rand start to actually intentionally use his Tavarian pull as a weapon in this book, and so far I like Caroline and Darlene. I assume they'll be more relevant in later books because of the viewing from Min. I guess Rand will have Darlene instated as the King of Tyr at some point. Then when they reach the tent, we get this meeting between, well, not meeting, Rand spots Padan Fain. I love that because you instantly know shit's about to go down, and you know internally Padan Fain must be going absolutely hysterical. And then we get the cool fight between Toram and Rand from Min's POVs before the tent is snatched up and everyone's surrounded by the fog. I'm really curious as to what Padan Fain actually is now. It seems like he's a mix of Mordet and the Shadow, which I didn't even realize were different darknesses before Rand got shanked. It's cool seeing him develop these different abilities, like whatever he did with the fog. It's kind of similar to Mashadar, but not quite the same. And also his ability to detect Dark Friends from the last book. So Rand gets cut by Mat's all-reliable dagger, after what was probably one of my favourite sequences of close combat in the series so far. Honestly, props to Padan Fain on that one, I have to say. He really kicked ass. He just jumps out of the fog, he full sent that shit, and he's bobbing and weaving, and he damn near kills Rand. So after Rand's brought back to Cairhien, we get this confrontation that I actually really loved. I thought it was really interesting, where you have Cadsuane, Amis, and the Ashaman, and they're all in this kind of standoff over who's going to look after Rand. I thought that was really interesting, especially coming from Cadsuane. Okay, I lost the recording for this next bit, so taking a break from Rand real quick to talk about Cadsuane. Cadsuane shows up after Rand's meeting with the clan chiefs and just immediately takes control of the whole situation, and she just toys with Rand, provoking him. It's child's play for her, even though Rand is trying to resist it. I'm conflicted about Cadsuane. I really like her as a character. I think she's the most intriguing new introduction in a long time. But what I'm conflicted on is her arc progression with Rand, because Min had a viewing in this where she said that Rand needs Moiraine by his side or else he'd most certainly fail. So I think Cadsuane is the substitute for Moiraine in that viewing because Moiraine is brown bread at the moment. The reason I'm conflicted on this is because of how she talks about Rand and the Ashaman. Unless I'm reading things wrong, Rand is just another target for Cadsuane. She enjoys the thrill of chasing after and taming these male channelers like Logain and Taim, and Rand is just next on the list. She's also way more adamant on the Aes Sedai being top dogs than Moiraine seemed to be. Like, you see how she reacts to the Aiel being contentious towards the Aes Sedai. And she said the Aiel not sending warders to the White Tower needs to be fixed. There's also what I mentioned earlier in the review about her wanting to teach Rand and by extension the Ashaman a lesson or something like that. I might be remembering things wrong, but I'm pretty sure she said something about wanting to teach them manners in some way. I guess the Aiel could go to the White Tower peacefully at some point for some reason. Maybe they're convinced somehow. But like, the reason I'm saying this is because in the Dragon Reborn, Perrin had his wolf visions in Tel'aran'rhiod, Riyadh, where he saw the White Tower crumbling, but in that vision he saw Amis and Egwene at the White Tower together while it crumbled. And I'm gonna branch off here into another theory here, but they recognized him while he was looking through that window thing in the sky in Tel'aran'rhiod Riyadh. So I actually think Perrin, as a wolf brother, can access past, present, and future from Tel'aran'rhiod Riyadh using those visions, because it has been said in the series at some point, can't remember what book, but it has been said that wolves kind of exist in Tel'aran'rhiod Riyadh. They're linked together, and in Tel'aran'rhiod Riyadh you can find all the wolves from past, present, and future. I'm rambling on here for a separate theory, but also early on in the book she's thinking about how nobody can be allowed near Rand that won't influence him in the way that she wants him to be. So yeah, I'm not sure about the future with Cadsuane, but I'm excited for it. Sorry to keep listing stuff off here, but there's also the stuff in the back of the wagon where she's saying, I won't harm him more than I need to. I think that's what she said. I think she might be the cause of the second time where a woman will cause Rand great harm if Perrin's not there from that viewing Min had. So there's all these things that point towards her harming Rand, but at the same time, I think Rand needs her. So maybe she's like an antagonist for a while, and then afterwards she's on Rand's side. I don't know. I do think Lanfear and Moiraine will show up again at some point in the series, but I do think Rand needs Cadsuane. So back to Rand. In the final chapter, Rand wakes up and it's time to go to Illian. I thought the Illian and Shadar Logoth stuff was one of the best parts of the book, while simultaneously being the worst. Rand is near death and bedridden for 2 days, and then he just gets up and is off to fight one of the Forsaken. That is just bizarre to me, and it just doesn't make sense. Healing as well, like even if he's healed to recover, healing drains you to the point where surely he's not able to just get up and go fight one of the Forsaken. I know he used the Void as a crutch, but still, the Void is a mental thing. Surely he just collapses at some point. So the fight itself was really enjoyable, though. I liked everything to do with like setting off the traps in Illian. Thought that was clever, and I really enjoyed that new ability introduced with the fire and air attack, where you have all the little red lines. I thought that was really cool. Then Samael lures Rand off to Shadar Logoth, and we get the final confrontation. I'm not going to talk about that much. It was a cool fight. That's it. The interesting part of that whole thing was the guy showing up to help Rand. I'm pretty sure this is Marden showing up again. When Moghedien first met him, she described him as a tall, broad-shouldered young man in black boots and breeches. Then Rand described the mystery man as a big fellow, little older than he, with hair black as the night and a coat as black as an Ashaman's. So that seems to fit together. Rand said it couldn't be one of the Forsaken because he knows their faces. That was just a brain-dead thing to say. He has already witnessed Lanfear and Asmodean disguise themselves during the Shadow Rising, so no excuse there for Rand. After this, we get this cool moment where they both use Balefire, and when the streams meet, Rand describes his head as ringing like a struck gong, and he notes that seems to be two Mardens, or whoever that is, overlapping one another. So I don't know how Balefire caused this, but the reaction is actually relevant. If you remember when Rand cut off Asmodean from the Dark One, this was the reaction. Asmodean's eyes went wide and he screamed, a howl from the depths of horror. Like a struck gong, the Forsaken quivered. For an instant, there seemed to be two of him shivering away from each other, then they slid back together. So the reactions are the same, but the causes are different. I guess that's something I need to figure out as I read along the series, figure out how Balefire caused that. But there's also Min's viewing from this book. I saw you and another man, and I couldn't make out either face, but I knew one was you. You touched and seemed to merge into one another, and ... one of you dies and one doesn't. I feel like these are all the pieces I need to figure this out, at least all the pieces we've been given so far in the story. But I'm still kind of stumped on this. Like, if Luz Theron is the other guy in that viewing, like Rand assumed he was, then why do Mardens, or whoever that was, and Asmodean's doubles look the same as them? Gonna throw out a batshit crazy headcanon theory here. I barely even believe this myself, but here we go. Cadsuane is right, there is no Luz Theron. I'm basing this off of Asmodean. In The Shadow Rising, Asmodean said being connected to the Dark One is what prevented him from going mad when using the One Power. Then we have the body doubles. So I don't think there is a Luz Theron. I think there's a Rand of the Light and a Rand of the Shadow. How does this make sense? I have absolutely no idea, but think about this. Luz Theron was Aes Sedai, don't forget. And what is the ancient symbol of the Aes Sedai? Black and white, light and shadow. Why would Lanfear try to access the true power and open up the bore if it's the power of the shadow and Aes Sedai just can't use it? What if Aes Sedai are just channelers who are somehow two people in one of both light and shadow? You know, I think the taint on Saladin is somehow causing whatever normally keeps both versions of the person separated to be corroded, and then you have this leaking over, which is causing the madness. Like, in terms of, like, I'm trying to figure out how this is actually possible for there to be two Rands, two Asmodeans, two Mardens. But, like, you have to remember, there's so much stuff mentioned in previous books. Like, Moghedien has mentioned that world hopping was a thing back in the Age of Legends. You know, people were going to other worlds. We've done the mirror world hopping in book 2 with the portal stone. And, like, is it so hard to believe that there's a mirror world that's like an upside down of our world, or not our world, of Rand's world, whatever that's fucking called. I know it's a version of Earth, but basically the creator's world, let's say, it's so bizarre to believe there's an upside down version of that where there's a dark Rand, like everybody's positions are kind of flipped. It's a mirror world that is so close to the one we know that it's just the same things, but everybody's reversed and they're connected somehow. I don't know. Maybe I'm going just way overboard with this theory. But there are flaws with this theory. Like, why do we have Luz Theron memories in Rand's head then? if it's not actually Luz Terran, and why does the Luz Terran in Rand's head mention Elayne a fair bit if it's not Luz Terran? So yeah, that's a flaw of the theory, and I'm not able to explain it away right now. I've been talking about Rand for too long, so I'm going to finish off his arc real quick. He uses Balefire to mercy kill Leah. Thank fuck. Hopefully he is not so against killing women from now on after that, which in the process kills Samael. And he does this before returning to Ilian to claim the Crown of Swords. The Crown of Laurel Leaves that Min first mentioned in the very first viewing dump in the Eye of the World. It was really interesting seeing Rand claim the crown for himself, because previously he's been really reluctant to actually claim a throne. So it was really good to see this change in his character. Well, I guess I shouldn't say it was good. It seems to be not a positive development for Rand mentally. Like when everybody starts chanting King of the World, he was like, oh, I like the sound of that. So he really did have a great arc in this book. Normally I would say Samael is not dead because there's no body, but I think he has to be because of the way Balefire works. He died in the past and he didn't really have an option not to die. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think that's how Balefire works. Like Mashadar just killed him, so I don't know if the Dark One can like revive him. I don't know if Mashadar's darkness kind of negates the Dark One's darkness, so he can't be revived. But anyways, yeah, I think he is actually dead. It wasn't a fake out. I watched a review that said Rand is getting kind of overpowered. I hard disagree with that sentiment. I think Rand really isn't all that in the grand scheme of things. Let's go over the Forsaken deaths so far in the series. Agenor accidentally offed himself. Bathamel got wrecked by a bush. If not for Moiraine, Bilal would have killed Rand. If not for Moiraine, Lanfear would have killed Rand. If not for Nynaeve, Ravin probably would have killed Rand. If not for the Mystery Man, Samael probably would have killed Rand. The only real win Rand has earned against the Forsaken so far has been Asmodean. I think he's only really getting by the skin of his teeth, and I don't think people are really recognizing that enough. Like, I think he only appears to be OP because he's able to stand up against Aes Sedai now, which are like these people that have been really, built up for us as the readers. But talking about Min next, I don't really have much to say for Min. Min in this is basically just Rand's woman and his portable fortune machine. I honestly don't find Min to be a very interesting character. I liked her a lot more earlier in the series when she was just unapologetically herself and she had her own style and all of that. And now she's just kind of changing more and more for Rand, which I'm not crazy about. The relationship itself, though, is a lot better than previously. It's definitely the best of the three, but obviously it is because Min is the one that's spending time with Rand. But anyways, it was enjoyable seeing them actually being there with each other, hanging out, actually being there for each other emotionally and all of that. And, they comforted each other in this book. And I like seeing how Min is just so determined not to let Rand send her away. She's really a ride or die, which I can respect. She's willing to leap into the fire with him, or for him even, I'm sure. There's two more viewings I want to mention. The first one is the one of Taim, where there's blood in his past and his future, and that he's very dangerous. I already mentioned during the Lord of Chaos review that I think Taim is the most obvious Dark Friend ever, so I'm not going to repeat my reasonings for that, but I think this viewing is pointing towards that. And the second viewing is the one of the 5 Aes Sedai in Rand's hand. So I'm assuming this is the 5 Aes Sedai that went with him to visit the Sea Folk. So Alana, Marana, Bera, Phaedrin, and Rafaela are going to keep their oaths to Rand. I don't know if that makes the other 4 of the 9 Dark Friends, but I've been saying since the Shadow Rising that I think Varian is a Dark Friend. So I'm just going to take this as confirmation that she is one. I've been thinking it way too long. And I don't know what the situation is with the other 3 besides Varian, if they can bypass the oaths without being Dark Friends, but I highly doubt the odds of being a Dark Friend among Aes Sedai is 4 and 9. So moving on to Egwene, I actually didn't have any issues with Egwene in this book. Who would have thought? All it took was giving Egwene only 4 chapters for me to not find something to annoy me with her. So these are Egwene's best chapters to date so far in my opinion, but they didn't make me like her any more or dislike her any less, so she's still bottom of the rankings for me. She is dealing with the other Aes Sedai trying to use her as a puppet Amazon in this book, and at the very start she finds out about the Mogadeen escaping. I thought the eeriest part of this whole book was Erengar giving Egwene this head massage to deal with her headaches. Like, when you know the full context of that, it just makes it so discomforting, because Egwene is worrying over this Forsaken, meanwhile she has another one just casually massaging her head, as she could literally die at any moment, which I would be all for. So I think Eowyn might actually be using compulsion on Egwene during these head massages, because she's been having these constant headaches. So compulsion to do what? I'm not sure. I think maybe trying to get Egwene to side with Delena. After she finds out about Moghedien, she's confronted by Nicola and Arena, and they try to blackmail her using their knowledge of her and the others pretending to be Aes Sedai. This obviously does not work at all. It completely blows up in their faces. There were viewings about Nicola and Arena during either The Fires of Heaven or Lord of Chaos. I can't remember what they were, nor do I care enough to find them and find out, but I remember when I read them I thought they were negative, so I think Nicola might end up becoming a dark friend due to her eagerness to advance. Then later that night, Egwene meets up with the Wise Ones in Telain Riyadh, and I thought that was actually a really good interaction. I liked how the Wise Ones kept most of the information to themselves. They only told Egwene what she needed to know. They didn't tell her about Egwene being kidnapped or the Aes Sedai swearing fealty to him. I thought that was really good, and I really liked how you saw how Amis visibly struggled with this, because Amis, we already know how hard of a woman she can be, and we know how good of a control she has over Telain Riyadh. So I liked how that really showed the kind of the strength of the bond that they developed while Egwene was in the ways. We start to see Aes Sedai swear fealty to Egwene with Theodrin and Faolain, which is unprecedented, but they do it to prove their loyalty. Then Garrett Bryn has this moment where he implies that the army is Egwene's and not the Hall's, after he talks about what could actually go down once they reach Tar Valon, before Egwene and Swan ride through a forest with Morel and arrive at Morel's hideout. So yay, Lan's back, and he's got this mental disease after Moiraine's death, which Morel and Nisao have been trying to help him with, while Morel has been comforting him, wink wink. So Egwene uses the fact that Lan was bonded without consent to force Morel and Nisao into also swearing fealty to her. So I'm interested in seeing how Egwene making Aes Sedai swear fealty actually goes down, because Rand is doing the same thing, so I wonder how Egwene will react to that without just being a hypocrite. Moving on to the Ebudar plotline, starting off with Nynaeve and Elayne. I'm not going to completely summarise Nynaeve's and Elaine's parts of this arc, because I honestly don't care about finding the bowl. I find that particular plot point to be pretty boring. So I'm just going to talk about the main moments. In general, I like the progress they made with Matt. They took steps towards being more reasonable with him, which brings us to the apology. This was a bittersweet moment for me. I love that the apology happened, because the moment itself in The Dragon Reborn really pissed me off. So I was happy for Matt that this happened, but at the same time I was really annoyed because the girls would never have done this if they didn't have to. That to me just isn't good enough if you're only doing it because you have to. At least when it comes to Nynaeve, she's a good enough person underneath all the annoying bullshit where she would at least recognize that she needs to apologize. But Elayne 100% would never do this if Avienda and Brigitte didn't make her. So no, I'm not giving them props for this at all, especially seeing as they tried to weasel their way around it immediately. The way they treat Matt in this book is so annoying, but it's just typical female Wheel of Time character behavior. I'm not going to go too deep into it talking about it, because I'm sure we're all just used to it by now. And in true female Wheel of Time character fashion, they just go around Ebudar being demanding, trying to get their way, and crying about not being recognized as full Aes Sedai. I'm going to go on a side tangent here. The girls aren't real Aes Sedai. Even if you look at it as an act of the Amyrlin, they are not real Aes Sedai, because Egwene is not a real Amyrlin. I don't like Elaida at all, but Elaida is on the right side of this conflict, technically. Elaida caught Moiraine and Swan hiding and aiding the Dragon Reborn, for crying out loud. Of course she's going to try and depose and still Swan. She's a real Aes Sedai. The Saladar group are called rebels for a reason. They left the real tower to try and start their own thing. Egwene is not an Amyrlin under tower law, no matter how you want to go about things. So no, Elayne and Nynaeve are not real Aes Sedai, and it's so fucking ironic because they are the worst Aes Sedai to ever exist. They fail so bad with the sea folk bargaining, they have to use Matt. They fail spectacularly with Rian and Satala both. They don't make any progress finding the bowl until they meet Satala, who they would not have met without Matt. Imagine they didn't bring Matt with them to find the bowl in the end. We would be down 2 annoying POVs for the rest of the series. They only start to make progress after the other Aes Sedai come with them, and if I'm being really nitpicky, Elayne would not have managed that if Egwene was not Amyrlin. So separating the two now, Nynaeve didn't even have many POVs in this. I didn't realize how much of this book was Matt. I've basically gotten to the point with Nynaeve where I've just accepted how she is. I call her a bitch a lot while I'm reading, but she's not one. She is most definitely a humongous shrew, though, so it makes it really annoying for me to read her chapters. I don't find it comedic. She's still the best female character easily. She's arguably the most loyal character in the series. It's between her, Matt, and maybe Perrin. She genuinely cares about the well-being of those close to her, like Elayne and the Emmons Fielders. She's someone you know you can always trust, regardless of how she acts outwardly, and you just know you can always rely on Nynaeve. I've mentioned already a good few times in past reviews about why Nynaeve is the way she is because of her being a wisdom and all of that, so I'm not going to repeat myself. So while she absolutely wrecks my head while I'm reading the books, I still like her. I'm just waiting for her to stop being so damn annoying. At the moment, she's just way too much of a shrew and she lacks any semblance of self-awareness. It's really important to pay attention to the little things with Nynaeve's character because there are the moments where her kind and caring nature comes through. Like, don't forget it was Nynaeve who talked to Tywin in the end once she found out about what was really going on there with her and Matt. And she finally got past her block in this book after facing near death by drowning after Moghedien launches a balefire attack at her boat. So it was a cool moment. It was a cool chapter, but it was hard for me to enjoy the moment because of how Nynaeve acts. I am happy for her though. She's saved by Lan and they have their reunion, which I honestly hated. She just beats the shit out of him, tells him that he belongs to her, and then tells him that they're getting married. Not really my cup of tea, but hey, gender roles in real time be like that. Now she's in newlywed mode, which I really hope doesn't last too long. Something that really annoyed me from Nynaeve though is her reaction to Lan telling Matt that Moghedien killed her bodyguards. Like, really, Nynaeve, that is such a stupid thing to not want to tell Matt about. I think it's incredibly selfish to not want to tell somebody about the Forsaken of all things just because you're scared of how it'll look on yourself. Now it's time to talk about my new least favourite character, tied last place with Egwene, Elayne bloody Trakand. Guys, if Elayne makes it to the last battle, I wholeheartedly hope she just raises her chin to the wrong person and they hit her with a fucking one power uppercut to the jaw that takes her head clean off. I'm so sick of Elayne. I don't think she even does anything in her own POVs besides take over the Saladar Aes Sedai and bring them to meet the kin. So I don't really have all that much to comment on. She just really annoyed me with her sense of always thinking she's above everyone else, trying to give out commands while making demands. I don't even care about her Daughter Vandor backstory anymore. Sure, it makes her more realistic, but she just has zero redeeming features like there are for Nynaeve. Like, when she's with the kin and Matt barges in saying, "Oh, I found the bowl," she lies and she's like, "Oh, we already found it." Like, what a fucking petty loser, bro. Like, she only had one good moment in the whole book towards the end, and it's another thing to do with Matt, you would have thought. When Matt tries to give her the medallion and she has her first bit of real progress with Matt, not spurred on by other people. Can we just appreciate how much of a gem Matt is for even being willing to give her the medallion in that situation? I really enjoyed learning about the kin in this book. I thought that was great world building, learning about them and how there's thousands of them out there, and about their own customs, how they're kind of imitating the tower in their own way. Then we find out Rian is 412, so the kin have drastically longer lifespans than the Aes Sedai. Samael gave Savannah this terangrial that he kind of mockingly said could be called an outrod. During the Great Hunt, the Aes Sedai said that they have been using the terangrial for purposes that might not even be their original use. So huge props to Jordan on this foreshadowing here. It looks like the Aes Sedai have not been using the outrod properly at all. If it turns out that the half-truths they've been using have been decreasing their lifespans, that'll be hilarious. Poetic justice if I've ever seen it. Matt undoubtedly stole the show in this book. He made an uninteresting plotline enjoyable just by being Matt. He doesn't even get that much development outside of his view on women. So when we first meet Matt, he's at the Silver Circuit, and he spots Cheyenne, who's the dark friend that tried to stab Rand in the Eye of the World. And he finds out that she is staying at Cardan's palace from this random old dude who is seemingly important. I think this is Jane Firestrider. This is not a proper theory, this is more of a wild guess, but I do have 3 shit reasons why I think it's him, and 1 good one. I've thought Jane is going to pop back up in the series since the beginning because he's name dropped so often. I just think it's obvious that he's going to show up again. So reason number 1 is that Matt is Tavirian. Really simple. If any of the cast is going to meet Jane Firestrider randomly, it's one of the Tavirian boys. Reason number 2 is that he said that he thought he should recognize him. I think this is his past memories at play, even though he said straight after that he recognizes him from the Silver Circuit. Reason number 3 is that Jane Firestarter got name dropped 3 times in this book. That is not uncommon, he gets name dropped a lot, but every time he's mentioned in this book is during Matt's arc. Reason number 4, the final reason, the reason I think that it is Jane, is the vileness that Cadsuane introduced. So the vileness is this stain on Aes Sedai history from after the Aiel War. It was said in previous books that Jane Firestarter disappeared at some point after the Aiel War. We get a POV from this old man as well. I think it's him because he mentioned in it wanting to find Cheyenne again, and Matt mentioned earlier on that he spotted this old dude next to Cheyenne at the Silver Circuit. So during this POV, he mentions that he's having issues with his memory. Who do we know in this series that can fuck up your memories bad? Aes Sedai, Moghedien did it to Nynaeve Elayne during the Shadow Rising. So I think the Aes Sedai did something to Jane Firestarter during the vileness. Matt arranges stakeouts on where Carradine is staying, but Carradine spots Matt, and this results in these pretty funny attempts to kidnap Matt continuously throughout the book, and he just thinks it's Ebudari ways and fends them off every time. I love that. It kind of reminded me of the Grey Men when they were after Matt, and he just kept killing those guys, sometimes without even noticing. So Matt wants to meet up with Nynaeve and Elayne, which brings him to the Tarrasyn Palace, where he first meets Tylin. Time to talk about that, I guess. So Matt is raped at knife point by Tylin, and it's fucking horrible. He's just incredibly uncomfortable with the whole thing. Honestly though, I just took this as Wheel of Time, Wheel of Timing, because, you know, we already know how much Jordan likes to talk or comment on gender roles and how women are treated in our society through the Wheel of Time, so I honestly just wasn't really that surprised by this turn of events. It bothered me how this was handled though. Sure, characters had annoying reactions to this, especially Nynaeve and Elayne, but unfortunately victim blaming is a thing in the real world too. What bothered me about this was how Jordan made it more about Matt wanting to be the one doing the chasing rather than making it about the trauma associated with the act, which just made it so much worse because by the end Matt is all like, oh, I'll miss you too, when he's leaving Tylin. So Matt seemingly wasn't even traumatized that much by this event, so I can barely even call it Stockholm Syndrome when he's saying that at the end, which is just weird because he's like holding back weeps while it's happening. He just wanted to be the one chasing Tylin in the end. He even enjoyed the act sometimes when she persisted in cornering him into it afterwards. He just didn't like the relationship dynamic. If you're going to tackle the issue like that in the story, why even do it? Something I didn't expect at all from this book that I loved was the Matt and Brigitte bromance. I thought that was fantastic. Platonic relationships unlocked for Matrim Cawthon. So when Matt gets back to the Wandering Woman, he finds Brigitte waiting for him in his room, and he remembers her from the time he blew the Horn of Valir, and they end up deciding to agree to keep each other's secrets. This is one of my favourite relationships in the series to date. I loved how Brigitte is just basically one of the boys for Matt, like how they point out for each other men and women that one or the other would be interested in. I really enjoyed seeing the development that both his relationship with Tylin and Brigitte caused in Matt. Like, obviously the situation with Tylin is horrible, but still, she still gave him like a good perspective on how some women he chases after might be feeling. Obviously, Matt knows the necessity of consent, unlike Tylin, but still. Then Brigitte showed Matt that yes, you can in fact have female friends who are people you just don't want to chase after without them being childhood friends or ex-babysitters. We meet Satala and Beslan during Matt's arc as well. 2 more gems. I always love the C-list characters introduced in this series. So fast forward to the end and we have everyone meeting up at the building in the Rahad, and everything goes to shit. Falien and Ispan show up with a bunch of dark friends and Matt has to fight a Golem. I thought that was an awesome fight. I think it's probably the best one-on-one fight in the series so far. And I did not expect at all for Golem to be such cool shadow spawn. So there are these creatures made by Agonor who can detect the one power and are resistant to it, and they have like super strength seemingly, and they're able to go through really tight spaces. And 6 of them were created to be used to kill Aes Sedai. I really loved that world building, and I loved how it was foreshadowed that this Golem would show up when Rand asked Min what could possibly tear Hardfell apart. The Golem kills Nailsian, and honestly I'm surprised that death even upset me. I didn't even notice I was starting to like Nailsian like that. I should have seen it coming. There were so many death flags with the I should have said home stuff. So after the Bowl arc is wrapped up, we once again meet up with everybody, this time in the palace, where Matt has yet another badass moment where he completely finesses the Sea Folk using his past memories and his Taviran pull. I thought it was so funny how Nynaeve and Elayne come up to him afterwards and they're like, "Oh, so sorry, Matt. We just absolutely had to use you there." In reality, they're just completely useless themselves in that situation. Wrapping up Matt's arc then, once the bargain is settled, Matt ends up finding out that Oliver is missing, which leads to him searching for him with the help of some Red Arms. As soon as there was a commotion at the docks, I knew what was going on. The Seanchan invade Ebudar just like I predicted last review, same as they did at Falme, and not Falme, at the Fortress of Light, and Matt is buried under a wall after being caught up in some Damani attacks. So I guess this will all lead to him finally meeting the Daughter of the Nine Moons. Not sure how that's going to go down with Tylin. And I guess it's going to be Ebudar versus Seanchan with Matt as the general, which should be great to see. I'm excited for that. I saw 2 reviews for this book where they said the Seanchan just disappeared since book 2. That is just not the case at all. In book 4, we have Egwene as a B-lister, and we have Lady Surratt POVs, where she talks about her political situation, about not being able to return to Seanchan after Falme, but if she has a successful run with the Haleen, she'll earn prestige and favour with the Empress. In book 5, Avienda and Rand literally go to Seanchan when they travel. In book 6, we get these reports from Pedro and Niall indicating that Seanchan have already taken over Tanchico, so they've been here the whole time. This review is getting too long and I don't want to split it into 2 parts for this book, so I'm going to go through the rest pretty quick. Morghese's arc, could not care less about this. She's been through tough times because of Eamon Valda and Asunawa, but this arc is just pointless to me. Savannah's arc, also could not care less about this. Savannah is one of, if not the least interesting characters in the series. I loved Samael during her arc though. I thought it was hilarious how he gave her fool boxes and we learn about the call boxes and the way lines from Samael too. I like that world building. Moghedien got it rough in this book, but I think she had some of the most interesting chapters in this, if I'm being honest. We find out a lot of higher level world building from her, which I loved. Like, we learn about vacuoles, which are these bubbles in the pattern that time works differently in, and people can enter them as they choose. I thought that was sick. Then we also finally learn about the Shadow's equivalent of the One Power, which is the True Power, and we see some of the potential there that Mirren suspected when Moradin just uses the True Power to just step outside of the pattern. I thought that was insane. Galena is another character that got it rough in this book, to say the least. No sympathy there from me. I'm glad she did. I'm very curious about what Moradin actually is. I don't know if he's a new Forsaken or a pre-existing one that's using the Mirrors of Mist, or if he's just something new altogether. Like, if Shahidar Haran is a leveled up Fade, is Moradin a leveled up Forsaken? We also learned about the mind traps, which are these terangrials that like contain somebody's consciousness, or what makes them who they are, like Severance procedure but fantasy. So the True Power is this special privilege given to 30 people that directly from the Dark One, and it's incomparably more addictive than the One Power, and people that use it will eventually develop these black flecks in their eyes called, what were they called? Sa'a. So I'm really looking forward to learning more about the True Power. We only got little tidbits in this book. And I predicted last review that Perrin was going to end up using this. Of course, at the time, I didn't know what the True Power actually was, but I'm going to stick with that prediction still. I guess I'm looking out for black flecks in Perrin's eyes going forward. Speaking of Perrin, I forgot to mention this earlier, but when Matt is remembering blowing the horn, he lists off a bunch of legend names before getting to Brigitte, and one of the names he mentioned was Shivan the Hunter. So he was said to herald the end of ages, the destruction of what had been, and the birth of what was to be. I think this is who Perrin is the reincarnation of, because there's a bit in the Keraton cycle, can't remember what book it was mentioned in, but the passage basically says something like, once this person shows up, it marks the beginning of the end. And sorry, I don't remember the exact wording or what book it's in, but I think this has to be Perrin, because Rand and Matt, we already know who they're the reincarnations of. One is the Dragon Reborn, one is Aemon. So I think that leaves Perrin to be Shivan the Hunter. And I don't know if legends can be reborn in bodies of the opposite sex, but if they can, there was another one mentioned, Paedrig Paedrig the Golden-Tongued Peacemaker. I think maybe that's Elayne, if that's possible, because the girls have to mention like 5 times per book that Elayne likes to be Peacemaker. That's all for A Crown of Swords. Thank you guys very much for watching. I'm not going to do a long outro here because this review is a lot longer than normal. The next review will be on The Path of Daggers, so I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.